It was late in the evening when Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Walker, just back from a tense mission in the Middle East, found herself on a quiet stretch of highway. The adrenaline of her recent operations still pulsed through her veins, but she longed for the peace of home. As she drove, the hum of the tires against the road provided a rare moment of tranquility. Suddenly, her headlights flashed off a set of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. A police officer had pulled her over. Amelia, a woman in her late 30s, composed herself as she slowed to a stop, reaching for her military ID and preparing for what she assumed would be a routine traffic stop. Her hands, though steady, were slightly tense from the stress of her recent mission. She didn't think anything was wrong. She had followed the speed limit, her headlights were on, and the night was quiet. But as the officer, a young man in his mid-20s, approached her car, something shifted in the air. He looked at her, scanning her from head to toe with an air of condescension. His eyes lingered a moment too long on her uniform, then flicked up to meet her eyes with a glare that held something more than simple authority. There was disdain there, the kind born from prejudice, the kind that assumed she didn't belong in the world she inhabited. His voice was flat as he asked, "Have you been drinking tonight, ma'am?" Amelia paused, feeling a wave of frustration bubble under her skin, but she knew better than to let it show. She wasn't one to be easily rattled, not after all the times she had faced danger head-on in hostile environments. "No, officer, I haven't been drinking," she replied calmly, her voice a controlled monotone. The officer seemed unimpressed, his gaze narrowing suspiciously. He didn't seem to believe her, but more troubling was the way he carried himself. He was treating her as though she had committed some hidden transgression simply by being there, a woman of color in the uniform of the military, in a town that wasn't used to seeing someone like her. His body language, his posture, he had made a snap judgment, one that many black women like her had come to know all too well. Amelia was used to this. It wasn't the first time her appearance or her rank had been questioned by those who assumed that her presence, her success, was an anomaly. But tonight, something in her snapped, not in anger, but in quiet defiance. As he asked her to step out of the car for a sobriety test, she took a deep breath and reached for her phone in the cup holder, her fingers brushing the edges of the device as she started recording. "What seems to be the issue, officer?" she asked, her voice low but firm, a slight edge of authority creeping into her tone. The officer shifted uncomfortably, still not fully understanding that his actions might be crossing a line. "It's just routine, ma'am. I need to make sure you're sober." Amelia didn't argue. Instead, she did something that caught him off guard. As she stepped out of her car, she reached for her military ID and pulled out the silver badge from her jacket pocket. She wasn't showing off, she didn't need to, but something about the moment felt important. She slowly opened her jacket, revealing the gleaming metal on her chest, the Silver Star, awarded to her for her courageous actions during a rescue mission in the Middle East, a life-or-death situation where she led her team through enemy fire to save civilians. The officer froze for a moment, his eyes flicking from the metal back to Amelia, his expression shifting. For the first time, he seemed to register who he was dealing with, though he didn't know the full extent of her achievements. She was a soldier, a hero, someone who had earned her place in the world. But for a fleeting second, the officer seemed almost embarrassed, his posture slackening slightly as he caught the glint of the silver medal. Amelia didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to explain. The message was clear, she was more than what he had assumed her to be. She had faced death, risked everything for people she didn't know, and she would not be reduced to a simple stereotype or dismissed because of the color of her skin or her gender. As the officer took a step back, mumbling a half-hearted apology, Amelia remained composed. She simply nodded, her calmness contrasting sharply with the tension that had filled the air moments earlier. She was a woman who had fought through more than most would ever understand, and in that moment, she was not going to let anyone make her feel small. As she drove away, the sound of her tires against the asphalt was like the final punctuation to the encounter. Her heart, though still heavy with the memories of war and sacrifice, felt a little lighter. She had faced down prejudice, not with anger, but with quiet dignity, showing that her worth was not up for debate. The world might try to label her, but it would never define her. Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Walker drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead, swallowed in the thick veil of night. The red and blue lights from the patrol car had long since faded into the distance, but their memory lingered in her rearview mirror like a bruise that refused to fade. Her knuckles were pale as she gripped the steering wheel, not from fear, but from a storm of emotion she didn't dare let surface. Her jaw tightened. She hated that she still reacted this way. After everything, after years in the field, after saving lives in war zones, after leading soldiers through unspeakable danger, why did a routine traffic stop still feel like a battlefield? Why did it sting more than the shrapnel scar on her thigh? She glanced at herself in the mirror. The sharp lines of her uniform. The faint reflection of the Bronze Star ribbon pinned to her chest. The eagle insignia gleaming on her shoulder. Symbols of honor. Symbols that had once meant everything to her. But tonight, they had meant nothing to that officer. He hadn't seen a soldier. He hadn't seen a leader. He had seen a black woman in a car that looked too nice, in a uniform that seemed too perfect. And that's all it took. She exhaled, long and slow, her breath fogging the glass. The hurt didn't show on her face, but it coiled in her stomach, tight and bitter. Not just because of the indignity of the stop, but because of the reminder it gave her, no matter how many medals she wore, some people would always look at her and see someone out of place. An anomaly. A mistake. Her phone buzzed in the console, pulling her from her thoughts. She tapped the screen with a practiced flick, one hand on the wheel, eyes still locked on the road. A message from Captain Henry Ortiz. They're unsealing the mission files. Washington Post is circling. Someone's talking. Be ready, Amelia. Her heart skipped a beat. Not out of fear. Out of something sharper, an electric mix of dread and destiny. That mission. The one no one ever talked about. The one where everything had gone wrong, until she had stepped up. Until she had disobeyed a direct order and led her team to safety, dragging 2 wounded soldiers on her back across hostile terrain. The one that saved lives but cost her a promotion and nearly her career. They had told her to be quiet. To forget it ever happened. To let someone else take the credit. And she had. Until now. She slowed the car and pulled into a narrow scenic overlook, the valley below swallowed in darkness. She stepped out, her boots crunching against the gravel, the cool air biting at her skin. She stared out into the night, the stars above glimmering like distant truths waiting to be uncovered. Amelia had always carried the weight in silence. She had survived wars, outlasted whispers in the halls of power, swallowed her pride more times than she could count. But now the story might come out. The truth. Her truth. And the world wasn't ready for it. But she was. She squared her shoulders, straightened her collar, and whispered to the night like a promise. Let them come. The sun barely cut through the gray haze as Amelia Walker stepped out of her black SUV, her uniform crisp, her shoulders squared, yet her eyes distant. The Pentagon loomed ahead like a relic of power and precision, but to her, it felt like walking into a tomb, one filled with memories that refused to stay buried. As she passed security and moved through the sterile halls, the noise around her faded into a dull murmur. Advisors barked updates into phones, officers marched with urgency, and analysts shuffled between rooms with arms full of intel. But Amelia barely registered any of it. Her focus was consumed by a single thought: the past is catching up, and I'm done running. She paused at a familiar hallway. Her boots slowed, her breath caught. Mounted on the wall was the memorial she'd avoided for years, polished brass etched with names of the fallen. Her gaze found it immediately. Staff Sergeant Julian Keyes. Her throat tightened. Her hand hovered near the plaque, trembling slightly before pulling back. She remembered his laugh, his quiet bravery, the way he'd told stories to keep the younger troops calm when mortar fire fell like thunder. He died in her arms, blood pooling faster than her hands could stop it. His final words still haunted her. "Tell my daughter." I sang to her in the rain. Amelia had promised she would. But she never found the courage. She inhaled sharply, pushing the emotion down like she always did. There was no space for grief here. No room for weakness. When she entered the conference room, the tension was immediate. Colonel Hastings sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. Other officers flanked him, but all eyes turned to her as the door clicked shut behind her. "Lieutenant Colonel Walker," Hastings said coolly, gesturing to the seat across from him. She sat, steady but alert, every muscle ready for whatever was about to come. "There's been a leak," he said, sliding a file across the table. "Operation Silencer. It's out. Or at least, pieces of it." Amelia didn't move. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but her face remained unreadable. She opened the folder and flipped through the contents. Blurry photos. Transcripts. A journalist's notes. And then, her face. Her name. Caught in the act of saving men she wasn't supposed to save. A younger version of her, blood on her uniform, dragging Julian through the mud. Her expression in the image looked like a scream frozen in time. "How much do they know?" she asked softly. "Enough," Hastings replied. "They know about the unauthorized evac. The drone that went off course. The soldiers who weren't supposed to make it home, but did." He paused. "And they know you were the one who gave the order." Amelia met his gaze. "Because no one else would." There was a flicker of something, respect, maybe, or anger, crossing his face. "That's not how this works." "That's how it should have worked," she said, her voice rising with years of repressed fury. "I watched good men die because command was too scared to act. You left us out there. You abandoned us. You disobeyed protocol. I saved lives," she snapped, rising to her feet. "What do you think your medals are worth if they're pinned to lies?" Silence fell. Thick and sharp. Hastings slowly stood, eyes locked on hers. "This leak, it could destroy your career." Amelia stepped forward, voice calm but powerful. "My career ended the moment I chose the truth over politics. I'm not afraid of being exposed. I'm afraid of staying silent." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I'm done protecting ghosts," she said quietly. "From now on, I speak for the ones who don't have a voice." Then she walked away, no longer a soldier trying to fit into a broken system, but a woman reclaiming her power, her purpose. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid. The morning air in Washington, D.C., felt unusually heavy, as if the weight of the truth Amelia had unleashed was pressing down on the entire city. Her name had exploded across every major news outlet. Lieutenant Colonel Amelia Walker. Once praised for her service and valor, now dissected by political commentators, military analysts, and conspiracy theorists alike. National hero or national threat? Leaked files reveal shocking truth behind Operation Silencer. Amelia sat motionless at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she had long forgotten to drink. Her apartment, usually a space of strict order and sparse decoration, felt suddenly claustrophobic. The blinds were drawn, the air stale, yet her mind was anything but still. She hadn't slept. Her phone, turned face down beside her, buzzed constantly. Some messages were from fellow soldiers, some supportive, others furious. Former commanders sent cryptic warnings. News agencies offered interviews. And then came the one message that changed everything. A voice message. From a blocked number. She hesitated before pressing play. The voice was unmistakable, even after all these years. Rough. Cold. Laced with resentment. You should have kept your mouth shut, Amelia. Some of us buried that past for a reason. The words echoed in her ears long after the message ended. Her grip on the phone tightened. Her breath caught in her chest. David Kane. He wasn't just a ghost from her past, he was the ghost. Her former commanding officer. The man who had made the call to leave Julian and his team behind. The man she had once respected more than anyone. She had believed he was gone. Retired. Maybe even dead. But no, he was alive, and he was watching her. She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching across the hardwood floor. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Panic tried to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. No, she couldn't afford fear. Not now. Not when the truth had just started to surface. That night, under the soft glow of a flickering streetlight outside a quiet cafe in Georgetown, Amelia slid a small flash drive across the table to a trusted investigative journalist. Her expression was sharp, her jaw tight, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion and the weight she carried. "This isn't everything," she said, voice hoarse from silence and stress. "It's just the beginning. Black sites. Missing soldiers. Unaccounted missions. What they've let the public see, it's a sliver of what really happened." The journalist, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a wary look, hesitated before picking up the drive. "If they come for me," she added, lowering her voice, "don't go public. Not right away. Find her. She'll know what to do." The journalist frowned. "Who?" Amelia leaned forward, her eyes dark, steady. "Julian Key's daughter." The name hit the table like a thunderclap. The journalist stared at her, lips slightly parted, unsure whether to ask the thousand questions suddenly racing through his mind. But Amelia had already stood. Her coat pulled tightly around her, she stepped into the chill of the night, shoulders squared against the wind. She didn't look back. Something had shifted. The past she had tried so hard to escape was no longer haunting her from the shadows, it was chasing her in daylight. But this time, she wasn't running. This time, she was going to finish what Julian started. Even if it meant becoming the enemy in the eyes of a country she once vowed to protect. The wind outside howled against the windows, brushing dead leaves across the glass like the fingers of ghosts. Inside the study, Sienna Keyes sat hunched in her father's worn leather chair, the scent of aged paper and cedar still lingering in the room like a memory refusing to fade. She hadn't been in here in years. Not really. Not like this, digging into a life the government had neatly erased. The flash drive in her palm felt heavier than its size should allow. As if it carried not just data but the weight of every unanswered question she'd buried since the age of 10. She hadn't cried when they told her he was gone. Everyone expected her to, teachers, neighbors, even her own mother. But Sienna had stared blankly at the kitchen floor that day, her hands clenched so tightly they left crescent moons on her palms. Something about the story didn't sit right. Her father didn't just vanish. He wouldn't. Now she knew why. She had spent hours combing through the files. Her eyes were burning from the screen, her pulse thrumming in her throat as she uncovered names, operations, and transcripts that sounded like scenes from a movie, but this wasn't fiction. It was the life her father lived and the betrayal that stole him from her. The file that broke her was a simple memo, one paragraph, government seal, and a single line in red. Shadow 6 marked compromised. All assets terminated under Protocol Echo. No retrieval. No burial. A silent scream built in her chest. Her father had been sacrificed. Not for a cause, not for honor, but for the protection of secrets. Her jaw tightened as she leaned back in his chair, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. Anger rose in her, slow and searing. All these years, they'd let her grow up thinking he was dead, maybe even a coward, when he'd been targeted. She thought of her mother, who had withered in silence, numbed by grief. And of herself, how many birthdays, school plays, and quiet nights she'd spent pretending not to wonder if he might come back. A sound shattered the stillness. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Just outside the door. Sienna's breath caught. Instinct took over. She slammed the laptop shut, slipped the flash drive into her back pocket, and doused the lights. The room fell into darkness, save for the glow of moonlight through the blinds. She crept to the hallway and pressed her back against the wall, her pulse now racing. Through the edge of the mirror hanging in the hallway, she caught a flicker, a figure in black, slipping out the back door like a shadow folding into night. Someone had been watching her. Her chest tightened with fear, but also resolve. If they were coming for her now, it meant she was close. Closer than anyone had been in 15 years. She picked up her phone. The screen lit up, revealing one saved number. Amelia W., secure line. Her thumb hovered over it. She didn't know if she was dialing for help or stepping further into the fire. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to run. Not when her father had stayed and fought. Sienna Keys was her father's daughter. And someone was about to learn just how dangerous that made her.